The woods have always been a refuge, a place of peace and mystery. But beneath their serene canopy lies a world brimming with dark secrets and spine-chilling encounters. Today we're diving into some of the most unsettling stories about people who ventured into the wilderness and came face to face with the unknown. From park rangers to surveyors, these first-hand accounts will make you think twice before stepping into the woods alone. You won't want to miss this one. It's December 2nd, 1974. 68-year-old William Bassey is on his way home after attending a late farmers' co-op meeting in the small town of Frederick, nestled in northwestern Wisconsin. It's been a long day, and as William drives down County Road West, his mind wanders to tomorrow's to-do list. Like any dedicated dairy farmer, he's a practical man, always up before sunrise and in bed shortly after it sets. But tonight is different. Tonight it's well past his usual bedtime. The clock is pushing 1 a.m. and exhaustion is creeping in. William struggles to stay alert as he drives through the quiet, dark roads. The weather doesn't help. Patches of thick fog roll in, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His headlights scatter eerily in the mist, distorting the road ahead. Determined to make it home, William slows down, navigating each fog bank cautiously. But then, through the haze, something catches his eye. A shape, barely visible on the left side of the road. At first, William thinks it's a car stalled on the shoulder. But as he slows down to take a closer look, unease sets in. The shape is all wrong, nothing like the boxy outlines of 1970s vehicles. Instead, it's curved, smooth, almost otherworldly. The object begins to take form, and William's heart pounds as he inches closer. Now, crawling forward, his headlights illuminate a bizarre sight. The object stands still, unmoving in the thick fog. It's not a car, it's not even close. It appears to be a massive curved structure, somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall, with a width of 3 to 6 feet. It's not a sphere, as he first thought, but more like an elongated egg or a bullet, its top tapering to a gentle point. William later described it as resembling a chemistry lab's bell jar, a smooth, seamless surface that gleamed faintly in the fog. He strains to make out its base, but the fog and his car's headlights obscure the lower half. What is this thing? As William's car crawls forward, his sense of unease deepens. The mystery looms larger than life, and he realizes he's stumbled upon something he cannot explain. As William creeps closer to the mysterious object, a chilling realization strikes him. It doesn't seem to be touching the ground at all. Suspended in midair above the road's shoulder, the object appears to be floating, defying the laws of gravity. But before he can fully process this unsettling sight, something even more extraordinary happens. The object isn't opaque, it's transparent, almost glass-like, and William's headlights cut through it, illuminating the interior as clearly as a light bulb within a jar. What he sees inside freezes him in place. A figure, arms raised above its head, trapped within the strange floating vessel. "I remember it just like it was yesterday," William later told journalists. "It was looking out of the window, and it wasn't like anything you'd see on Earth." The being was taller than any man William had ever seen, but had a face that was eerily unfamiliar. Its features were cow-like, with a flat nose and mouth, though the details were blurred by the thick fog and William's own mounting panic. Despite his fear, William described the figure in remarkable detail. Its head was somewhat rectangular, its body covered from head to toe in what looked like dark tan fur. Or was it fur? William wasn't entirely sure. It could have been a skin-tight suit, but to his eyes, it appeared animalistic. Only the face and chin were free of hair, revealing skin that framed 2 protruding ears, each about 3 inches long and shaped like a calf's. The eyes, however, were the most haunting feature. They were large, so large that they seemed to bulge unnaturally from the face, exuding a sense of fear that mirrored William's own terror. As his car crawled closer, he could only see the upper half of the creature, the lower part obscured by the fog and the vessel itself. What struck William most wasn't just the creature's appearance, but its demeanor. "It looked just as scared as I was," he recalled. The being's raised arms seemed to convey a message of surrender or perhaps a plea for help. Its wide, terrified eyes locked with William's, a silent exchange that left him rattled. To William, it was obvious that the creature was as much a victim of this bizarre encounter as he was. For a moment that felt like an eternity, though he later estimated it was no more than 10 seconds. William sat frozen, his gaze locked with the being's. Despite his pragmatic nature and his lack of interest in tales of UFOs or flying saucers, William couldn't shake the feeling that this creature was more human than alien. In subsequent interviews, he even referred to it as the human, a term that reflected his deep sympathy for the entity. But then reality set in. Heart pounding, William realized that whatever this thing was, he wanted no part of it. The thought that he might also be captured sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. Slamming his foot on the gas, he sped away, leaving the eerie vessel behind. The fog seemed to thin as the comforting glow of his farm lights came into view, promising safety and normalcy, or so he thought. As William fled the scene, something even stranger occurred. The interior of his car began to darken. The light reflecting from his headlights dimmed, as did the glow from his dashboard. It was as if a heavy shadow had fallen over his vehicle, muting all sources of light. His engine's hum grew quieter, as though the car itself was being drained of power. Just when he thought his night couldn't get any weirder, a soft whooshing sound filled the air, followed by a scraping noise. It was the unmistakable sound of something brushing against the roof of his car. William knew this stretch of road well. There were no low-hanging branches here. The only explanation was that the craft was moving, possibly ascending into the air. "It came right at me," William would later recount. There seemed to be a tremendous surge of power. The sensation was almost physical, amplifying the adrenaline coursing through his veins. By the time he reached the safety of his driveway, the strange glow and sounds had vanished, leaving him to wonder if what he had witnessed was real or a fevered nightmare. But for William, the memory remained vivid, a haunting reminder that the woods, and the world beyond them, hold secrets far stranger than we can imagine. William's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pressed the gas pedal harder, pushing through yet another fog bank. He no longer cared about the thick mist, all that mattered was reaching the safety of his farm. Within moments he was turning into the familiar driveway of the 450 acres he had worked tirelessly for 40 years. Here, perched on higher ground overlooking the road below, William finally began to feel a measure of relief. Shaking but determined, he parked the car and stepped out. The eerie glow and the strange object were gone, swallowed by the endless fog that still clung to the landscape. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him, and positioned himself at a window with a clear view of the road. For over half an hour he kept watch, his heart still racing, but the only thing he saw was another car casually passing through the fog, oblivious to what William had encountered. The road was quiet now, the fog unbroken. Whatever had haunted him out there was gone. Exhausted and overwhelmed, William eventually retreated to his room. He climbed into bed without telling his wife or son what had happened. Yet, his shaken demeanor over the following days spoke volumes. When he finally spoke to reporters weeks later, he admitted, "I was so gall-darn scared, I couldn't go out at night for days. I was pretty shook up for a couple of weeks." The next morning, William didn't rise at his usual early hour. He slept in, something completely out of character for the hard-working farmer. When he finally got up, instead of tackling the chores that awaited him, he found himself drawn back to the road where he'd seen the unexplainable. In the light of day, with the fog long gone, he tried to convince himself it had all been a bad dream. But what he discovered next made his blood run cold. There, in a nearby hayfield, was a large circular depression. The grass had been pressed down as if something massive, 6 feet in diameter, had briefly landed before vanishing into the sky. William stared at the strange imprint, his mind racing. It was too perfect, too coincidental. The terror of the previous night came flooding back, solidifying his belief that what he'd seen was real. As he stood in the field, regret began to creep in. "I wish somebody had been in the car with me," William later confided to reporters. "I should have stopped. I should have shown it I was friendly. I wish I could meet it again. Now I wouldn't hesitate to stop." But in the moment, fear had overpowered him, leaving him to wonder if he could have helped the terrified being he'd seen in the glowing vessel. For weeks, William tried to suppress the memory, burying himself in farm work, but the feelings wouldn't go away. What if the creature had been pleading for help? What if he'd missed a chance to make contact? Eventually, the weight of the experience became too much, and he shared the story with his family. Word spread quickly, and within days all of Polk County, Wisconsin was buzzing about William Bach's strange encounter. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of the story. Reporters from the traveled to Frederick to interview William, publishing a detailed account of his sighting. The article even included a sketch of the creature, which William confirmed was accurate, save for one detail: the ears were positioned slightly higher on its head. Reflecting on the experience, William told the reporters, "The first thing I thought of was, what in the world is that? I was going to stop, but I decided not to. They're so much more advanced than we are. I figured if I got out of the car I might end up dead on the side of the road. The next day, people would think I'd died of a heart attack. William Back's story didn't end with his December 2nd, 1974 encounter. In the days and weeks that followed, the eerie events surrounding his experience captured the attention of both the media and UFO researchers. One particularly strange connection emerged, the uncanny resemblance of the cow-like entity inside the glass UFO to persistent rumors of livestock mutilations across the United States. Could the humanoid's bovine appearance hint at a deeper, more unsettling connection? Was it abducted for the same reasons cattle were reportedly targeted, or was it something else entirely? For BAC, standing by his story wasn't easy. Neighbors questioned his account, skeptics scoffed, and the local newspaper editor dismissed his claims outright. "You know how the neighbors are," BAC remarked to reporters. They questioned it. The editor in town didn't believe it. "But this is a fact. I know people are going to be skeptical, but if they don't believe me, I'd take a lie detector test to prove this isn't just something I made up." What truly set Bach's encounter apart was the unique dynamic he described. The cow-like humanoid seemed as much a victim as he was. Its terrified expression and surrendering gestures raised strange and unsettling questions. Was it being abducted by the UFO, much like humans have reported? Was it from Earth or another world? Some even speculated that it could have been a prisoner of war caught between warring alien factions. Interestingly, Bach's encounter coincided with a series of UFO sightings in Polk County, Wisconsin and surrounding areas. Just weeks after Bach's sighting, another witness in Frederick, Gunnar Linder, reported seeing strange nocturnal lights. In the following months, more reports poured in: glowing orbs, metallic crafts, and other unexplained phenomena. Speculation about the humanoid's origins only deepened when some researchers proposed it might have been a Bigfoot. At first glance, this might seem far-fetched, but Wisconsin has a long history of Bigfoot sightings. Moreover, there is a peculiar pattern in the overlap of Bigfoot sightings and UFO activity. Throughout the 1970s, reports across the United States, from Pennsylvania to Colorado, described encounters where both phenomena occurred in the same location, sometimes within hours of one another. One such case, investigated by APRO in 1977, involved a Colorado family who experienced a cascade of strange events on their ranch, including cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, and even an encounter with a mysterious black box emitting an otherworldly hum. According to their account, glowing lights in the woods led them to witness figures emerging from the trees, entities with human-like shapes but alien features. Bach stood by his story until his death on December 2, 1996, exactly 22 years after his fateful encounter. Reflecting on his experience, he expressed regret at not trying to communicate with the humanoid. "I wish I could meet it again," he said. "I wouldn't hesitate to stop this time." To this day, Bach's encounter remains one of the most enigmatic UFO cases, leaving behind more questions than answers. Was the humanoid and abductee a hybrid or something entirely different? Was it connected to the livestock mutilations or to the broader mystery of Bigfoot and UFOs? One thing is certain. On that foggy December night, William Bach became part of a story that stretches far beyond the rolling hills of Polk County into the unexplained frontier of the unknown. Beings in silver suits and the mystery of Bigfoot. The story begins with two humanoid figures wearing silver suits that shimmered and shifted colors. These beings, often described in UFO lore as Nordics, approached a man, assuring him they meant no harm. They even greeted him warmly, saying, "How nice of you to come." But what followed pushed the boundaries of strange. The man claimed that, even though a mysterious black box he'd encountered earlier was now out of sight, he could see a flying saucer sitting about 50 or 60 feet away down a hill. The beings apologized for the disruption their presence had caused on his property and shared secrets that the man swore to keep confidential. When the man finally brought up the peculiar black box he and his son had found, the beings commended him for wisely leaving it alone. Things took a turn for the bizarre when the beings pointed in the direction where the black box supposedly still rested. A loud beep echoed through the area, and to the man's astonishment, a Bigfoot emerged from the ground as if it had been camouflaged. The towering creature lumbered toward the box, but as it neared, the tone of the beep changed. Suddenly the Bigfoot collapsed to the ground as if incapacitated. The man said the entire encounter lasted only about 5 minutes, but its implications were staggering. Could this encounter suggest a connection between UFOs and Bigfoot? Were the creatures under alien control, or were they being studied like lab specimens? Or perhaps there's an even stranger truth, a partnership or conflict between UFO occupants and Bigfoot. Roy Sullivan, the human lightning rod. Now let's switch to an equally mind-bending tale. The life of Roy Sullivan, a man seemingly marked by fate, or perhaps by something more sinister. Roy Sullivan, born in 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, grew up working on his family's farm. His first brush with death came during childhood when he swung a scythe in the fields as a storm rolled in. A lightning bolt struck the blade, but Roy was unharmed. This incident isn't officially counted among his lightning strikes, but it foreshadowed his unusual destiny. Years later, Roy became a park ranger in Shenandoah National Park, where he would serve for 40 years. His first documented lightning strike occurred in 1942. While sheltering in a fire lookout tower during a storm, lightning struck the structure, setting it ablaze. Roy bolted down the stairs, escaping the flames, only to be directly hit by a second bolt upon reaching the ground. The lightning burned his left leg and exited through his toe, leaving a hole in his boot. Fast forward to July 1969. Roy was driving along a mountain road when lightning struck nearby trees, leaped through his truck's open window, and knocked him unconscious. He narrowly avoided death as his truck rolled to a stop just before plunging off a cliff. The strike burned off his hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes. A year later, Roy was struck again, this time while standing in his yard. Lightning hit a nearby power transformer, and the bolt jumped to him, burning his left shoulder. By 1972, Roy began having eerie premonitions. In March, he dreamed he would be struck in April. And on April 16th, while working in a ranger station, lightning hit an electrical box, arced toward him, and set his hair on fire. Panicking, Roy tried extinguishing the flames with his jacket, then water, and finally a wet towel. These repeated encounters left Roy shaken. He began to believe he was cursed or targeted by forces beyond his understanding. He told reporters, "When I hear thunder now, I feel a little shaky." Roy's story raises profound questions about luck, destiny, and the unknown forces of nature, or perhaps something even stranger. Roy Sullivan's life reads like an unbelievable legend. Over his years as a Shenandoah National Park ranger, he survived not one but 7 verified lightning strikes, earning him the title, the Human Lightning Rod. On a routine patrol, Roy spotted a storm cloud and instinctively drove away as fast as possible. Thinking he'd put enough distance between himself and the storm, he stepped out of his truck, a decision he would immediately regret. Moments after exiting, Roy witnessed a lightning bolt trace through the sky, targeting him like an electric predator. The bolt struck his body, traveling down his left arm, through his leg, and out his foot, sending his boot flying. It even jumped to his other leg before exiting entirely. As if that wasn't enough, the strike ignited his hair, again. Luckily, Roy kept a can of water in his truck, a precaution that proved essential as he extinguished the flames. By now, Roy had become deeply paranoid of thunderstorms, and rightly so. On this occasion, as he tried to outrun a storm, he noticed something unnerving. The clouds seemed to be following him. He later swore it moved unlike any ordinary storm, almost as if it were intelligent or controlled. Before he could escape, the lightning struck, setting his hair on fire yet again. At this point, park employees were well aware of Roy's uncanny misfortune. Robert Jacobson, the park superintendent, once joked, "If you see a dark cloud, get away from Roy Sullivan." Roy himself lamented that others avoided him. He recalled an instance when a ranger abruptly left his company after hearing thunder in the distance. Some restaurants even refused him entry during overcast weather, afraid of the curse he carried. Retired but still passionate about the outdoors, Roy was fishing near a pond when a storm rolled in. He attempted to leave, but before he could pack up, lightning struck him once again. This time the bolt burned his chest and stomach and, predictably, set his hair on fire. As Roy rushed to his truck for safety, his path was blocked by a bear. With his hair literally on fire and his body in pain, Roy picked up a stick and drove the bear away, a testament to his unshakable resolve. He then retrieved his trusty water can and extinguished the flames for what would be the final time. Roy's story sounds so improbable that skeptics have questioned its validity. However, all 7 strikes were officially documented by Shenandoah National Park Superintendent R. Taylor Hoskins. Medical reports and photographic evidence, including the telltale lightning scars called Lichtenberg figures on his body, confirm the incidents. Even more astonishingly, if we count an unverified childhood incident involving lightning striking a scythe he held, Roy may have endured 8 lightning strikes in total. The odds of being struck by lightning in a given year are about 1 in 1,222,000, according to the National Weather Service. Over an 80-year lifespan, those odds increase to 1 in 15,300. However, Surviving 7 or 8 strikes is astronomically rare. Some estimates suggest odds of 1 in 10 to the power of 28. The story becomes even stranger when you learn there was yet another incident not officially included in Roy Sullivan's record. Roy came dangerously close to being struck by lightning for a 9th time. Incredibly, his wife wasn't so lucky. While hanging clothes on a line during a storm, she was struck by lightning. Roy, who was helping her at the time, narrowly avoided being hit himself. This incident left many wondering if Roy was the real target all along. Reflecting on his bizarre experiences, Roy once said, "When a storm comes, I put my wife and kids in the living room and sit alone in the kitchen, scared." The toll of being struck by lightning repeatedly wasn't just physical but psychological. Roy's fears of endangering loved ones led him to isolate himself during storms, and the mental strain proved overwhelming. Tragically, on September 28, 1983, at the age of 71, Roy took his own life. Despite the heartbreak, his story endures as a testament to his extraordinary, albeit harrowing, experiences. He holds the Guinness World Record for surviving more lightning strikes than anyone in recorded history. Today, Roy's legacy lives on through various forms of media, inspiring music, films, video games, and documentaries. His park ranger hats, scarred by lightning strikes, are displayed in Guinness World exhibit halls in New York City and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, as reminders of his unparalleled encounters with nature's fury. Speaking of park rangers, another chilling story comes to mind, one involving a former ranger whose experience was so terrifying she struggles to recount it to this day. In the summer of 1987, a 36-year-old woman named Cheryl and her 4-year-old daughter moved to Ruskin Cave Recreational Park in Dixon County, Tennessee. The park, situated atop a limestone mountain, features both Ruskin Cave and Jewel Cave. Cheryl, excited for this new chapter in her life, took up a staff position and moved into the park's staff quarters. Their small home was cozy, with a kitchen, bedrooms, and scenic views of the park's natural beauty, including wooded areas, a spring, and a creek running through the property. For weeks, life was peaceful. Cheryl worked her shifts while her daughter attended school. But one night in July, everything changed. At around 10:30 p.m., Cheryl was at her kitchen table reviewing paperwork from the day's tours when she heard a car pull up to the park's main gate. It was her daughter being dropped off after a softball game. Normally, Cheryl wouldn't think twice about her daughter walking the short path from the gate to their home, a route she had taken many times before. Through the window, Cheryl watched her daughter, still in her softball uniform, carrying a bag of candy from the concession stand, heading down the path by the creek. Moments later, the front door burst open. Cheryl's daughter stumbled in trembling, her face pale with terror. The candy bag was gone, and her uniform was dirty, with scratches on her back as though she had been knocked down. Cheryl's attempts to calm her daughter were interrupted when she glanced at the window and screamed. Outside, a massive figure loomed, blocking most of the window frame. Seconds later, it moved away, but they could still hear it, something large circling the house, moving toward the front door. Cheryl grabbed her daughter and they barricaded themselves in a back bedroom. With shaking hands, Cheryl dialed the police. Officers arrived 15 minutes later, but by then, the creature was gone. Cheryl's daughter described how something had splashed in the creek, reached for her candy bag with a massive hand, and knocked her to the ground. The officers searched the area but found only strange depressions in the mud, not distinct footprints. They recovered the torn candy bag scattered nearby, but oddly, none of the candy was taken. The senior officer seemed unusually concerned when Cheryl described the figure at the window, estimating its height at over 8 feet. Bears were common in the area, but bears don't grab candy bags or peer through windows. Before leaving, the officer advised Cheryl to keep the windows locked, especially at night. Trying to find some semblance of normalcy, Cheryl and her daughter stuck to their nightly ritual of sitting on the front porch sipping black tea. It was a comforting routine they'd shared since her daughter was little, and the tea was always served in old ceramic mugs passed down from Cheryl's grandmother. Usually this quiet time helped them unwind after a long day. One night, however, their peace was shattered. From somewhere near the far edge of the property, past where Ruskin Cave opened up, came a sound that made them freeze mid-sip. It wasn't like anything they had ever heard, a deep, guttural scream that echoed off the cave walls and seemed to reverberate across the entire property. The sound was so jarring that even the crickets stopped chirping. Cheryl's daughter grabbed her arm so tightly that tea spilled onto the porch. The screams continued, growing closer. They weren't a single continuous cry, but rather a series of roars that started low and built to an unnerving pitch. Even their neighbor's dog, which barked at everything, was now whimpering and scratching desperately at its door to be let inside. Overcome with fear, Cheryl and her daughter rushed into the house, locking the door behind them. They spent the rest of the night huddled inside, listening as the screams moved around the property, at times coming terrifyingly close, then fading into the distance. The noise finally stopped around 3 a.m., and Cheryl, drained and desperate for rest, fell into a fitful sleep on the couch with all the lights on. Her dreams, however, were far from restful. She kept seeing those massive hands she'd glimpsed at the window before. In her nightmares, they were now pushing through her daughter's bedroom window. Each time, Cheryl tried to run to her daughter's room, but her legs felt like they were weighed down, moving through molasses. The screams from her dream would grow louder, but now they were coming from inside the house. Each time she woke, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, she immediately ran to check on her daughter. This cycle repeated 3 times that night. By morning, Cheryl's exhaustion was evident, but she was determined to investigate. After sending her daughter to school, she ventured near the creek where her daughter had been attacked. What she found unsettled her further. Large swaths of vegetation were flattened, as though something enormous had been pacing back and forth, creating parallel paths through the grass. A pungent smell lingered in the air, a mix of wet dog and rotting flesh. The most chilling discovery was one of her daughter's hair ties from the softball game. It was lying in the middle of one of the paths, stretched out as if something huge had been playing with it. Shaken, Cheryl called in sick to work and spent the day sitting at her kitchen table, staring out the window at the flattened grass. Every rustle of the wind made her jump. Sleep deprivation was taking its toll. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her hands trembled at every noise outside. The coffee maker ran non-stop as she downed her 6th cup by noon. After picking her daughter up from school, Cheryl decided to start asking around the neighborhood, desperate for answers. That afternoon, she drove down Yellow Creek Road and stopped at a small white farmhouse she passed daily on her way to work. The elderly couple who lived there, the Johnsons, had been in the area for over 40 years, and if anyone knew something about the strange events, it would be them. Mrs. Johnson was hanging laundry when Cheryl approached. The moment Cheryl mentioned the screams, the older woman froze mid-motion, a wet sheet still in her hand. She called her husband over, and soon Cheryl was seated at their kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee Mrs. Johnson insisted she drink, her 7th cup of the day, though it hardly helped her nerves. Johnson explained they had been hearing the screams on and off for decades, starting shortly after they moved there in 1952. Initially they thought it was a mountain lion, but as Mr. Johnson noted, mountain lions don't walk on 2 legs. His wife nodded in agreement, adding details about strange occurrences over the years. Mrs. Johnson shared how their farm dogs, normally fearless animals trained to chase off predators, reacted in fear whenever the screams echoed through the area. She began recounting. The Johnsons, their elderly neighbors, shared their own unsettling encounters with the screams, describing how even their fearless farm dogs, trained to confront predators like bears without hesitation, would cower and hide under the porch on certain nights. These nights were always marked by the same eerie screams which began far away but quickly closed in, pacing around their home. Johnson hesitated, her voice faltering as she mentioned something more disturbing, an incident involving a tour guide at Jewel Cave the previous summer. The guide, Sarah, had led a group into the cave system when something began following them. It stayed just beyond the beam of their flashlights, but the group could hear it splashing through the water. Panicked, they all ran out of the cave and Sarah quit her job the same day. As Cheryl prepared to leave, Mr. Johnson suddenly remembered something. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a worn leather-bound journal. His father, a cave surveyor in the 1920s, had kept meticulous notes. Mr. Johnson opened the journal to a specific page, his hands trembling. Cheryl's coffee cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. There, in faded ink, was a crude drawing of the creature she had seen at her window. A massive figure with a flat face, round eyes, and coarse, bushy hair described as 2 to 3 inches long. The notes detailed similar encounters, including how these beings grew more active in the summer and frequently targeted children and teenagers, always at night and near water. The date of the journal entry sent chills down her spine, July 1927, exactly 60 years before her daughter's encounter. Mrs. Johnson, noticing the color drain from Cheryl's face, gently reached across the table and said, "Honey, maybe it's time for you and your daughter to find somewhere else to live." But Cheryl knew it wasn't that simple. She couldn't afford to quit her job and move. Besides, deep down, she felt moving wouldn't help. Whatever this was had already noticed them. That evening, as Cheryl pulled into her driveway, her stomach sank. Wet footprints, massive and fresh, led from the creek to her front door. They were unlike anything she'd ever seen, twice the size of a man's boot, with an unnatural shape, as if whatever made them wasn't quite human. Worse, they stopped abruptly at the door, as if the creature was still nearby. Frozen in her car, Cheryl's thoughts were interrupted by a scream, the worst she'd ever heard, coming from inside the house. It wasn't the guttural roar from before, this was different, and it made her blood run cold. Grabbing a tire iron from her trunk, Cheryl raced to the front door. The screen door hung crookedly, barely on its hinges, and inside, the furniture had been pushed against the walls, leaving a clear path through the room. The smell hit her immediately. Wet dog and decay, overpowering and vile. Cheryl's daughter stood in the center of the living room, unharmed but disheveled, staring at the ceiling. "It's been up there," her daughter whispered, in the crawl space, "watching me." Cheryl's eyes slowly moved upward. From the access panel to the attic, long, dark fingers curled around the edge of the opening. Whatever was up there shifted its weight, the ceiling creaking under its massive size. The tire iron felt useless in her hand as she realized the enormity of what she was facing. Then her daughter, still staring upward, whispered something that made Cheryl's stomach churn. "It's trying to take me." The creature above them let out a low, guttural noise, not a scream but a strange, garbled attempt at speech. It sounded like someone trying to talk underwater. A deep, unsettling chattering reminiscent of a distorted voice. The Ruskin Cave encounter finale. Cheryl grabbed her daughter's arm, backing them toward the door. As they moved, the thing above them followed, its weight groaning against the ceiling joists. They were almost at the door when her daughter froze, pointing to the window. Cheryl turned her head and nearly screamed. Pressed against the glass was another face, smaller but eerily similar to the one she had seen before, flat with round eyes. Behind it, more shapes loomed in the darkness, moving unnervingly close to the house. As they backed toward the front door, the crawlspace access panel suddenly crashed to the floor behind them. Without hesitation, Cheryl shoved her daughter outside and slammed the door shut. From within, the sound of splintering wood erupted as something massive dropped from the crawlspace. They couldn't pause to look back. Shadows darted between the trees surrounding their house, all converging toward them. Cheryl's car, only 30 feet away, now seemed impossibly far. Sprinting across the yard, she noticed some shadows were unnaturally large, cast not by porch lights but by something moving directly behind them. As they reached the car, a deafening splash came from the creek. The water teemed with movement, as if several creatures were emerging simultaneously. Cheryl and her daughter threw themselves into the car just as something huge slammed against the driver's side window. Fumbling with the keys, Cheryl started the engine, floored the accelerator, and sped away, gravel spraying in their wake. In the rearview mirror, she saw the creatures retreating toward the caves, their massive forms vanishing into the night. That was their final night at Ruskin Cave. Cheryl drove straight to a motel in Dixon County and never returned for their belongings. The next morning, she called the park management to quit her job, refusing to explain her sudden departure. A year later, investigators looking into the incident discovered a long history of similar sightings in Dixon County, Tennessee. Reports described creatures 8 to 9 feet tall, with flat faces, round eyes, and coarse, bushy hair. Dozens of locals had heard the same haunting screams during the summer of 1986, particularly near the caves. Even now, hikers and cave explorers occasionally report eerie screams on humid summer nights when the creek runs high. Cheryl's daughter, to this day, refuses to speak about what happened that night. On January 8, 2007, Chris Bledsoe set out with his 17-year-old son and 3 friends for a hunting trip in North Carolina's Cape Fear River wilderness. The remote area, perfect for solitude, seemed uneventful at first. They relaxed around a campfire by the river, enjoying the peaceful night. But when Chris decided to take a solitary walk along a nearby trail, things took a sinister turn. As he walked, Chris heard a strange ringing sound on either side of the trail. It wasn't the rustling of animals. It felt too deliberate, too unnatural. An experienced outdoorsman, Chris trusted his instincts, and they screamed that something was wrong. Quickening his pace, he found himself in a clearing near the main road. Scanning his surroundings, he froze. Above the tree line, 3 large orange spheres hovered silently, glowing ominously. They moved deliberately before stopping as though studying him. Mesmerized, Chris couldn't look away. The spheres remained motionless for 10 minutes, their silence oppressive. When he finally broke free from his trance-like state, panic set in. Sprinting back to the campsite, he found his friends, visibly shaken. But as he tried to explain, he noticed something was missing. His son. Panic turned to terror as Chris called out his son's name, running frantically into the woods. Moments later, his son stumbled out, pale and trembling. Barely able to speak, he muttered, "I saw something in the woods. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal." Chris's blood ran cold. Whatever his son saw was connected to the spheres. Before they could process what happened, the group noticed more lights in the sky. 6 to 8 bright orbs, appearing like stars before moving purposefully. 3 of them aligned in formation, flying directly toward the group. The lights grew blindingly bright, forcing them to shield their eyes. Suddenly, the lights flew over their heads and disappeared beyond the tree line. Chris knew they couldn't stay. Shouting at the group to pack up, he urged them to flee. Shaken and in shock, the men gathered their belongings and left the woods, leaving behind unanswered questions about the eerie connection between the lights and the presence in the forest. Chris and his companions hastily abandoned their campsite, leaving the fire crackling and their tents behind. They piled into his truck, fear silencing them as Chris floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed as the truck tore down the dirt road. Just as they thought they were safe, Chris slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, the men staring in disbelief. Hovering 200 yards ahead was an egg-shaped, brilliant white object. It emitted a faint glow and had long, rotating spikes protruding from its center, resembling something out of science fiction. The object hovered silently above the road, scanning the area. The men froze, unable to decide whether to flee or stay hidden. Suddenly the object rose slowly, then shot off over the treetops at impossible speed. Chris hit the gas again, desperate to get everyone home. His son sat in silence, pale and shaking, staring out the window as if expecting the object to reappear. Chris and his son returned to their 6-acre property later that night, hoping for refuge. But only hours later, an unsettling sound, like a low-flying jet engine, roared above their house. Chris ran outside, scanning the sky, but saw nothing. Half an hour later, the dogs in their kennel began barking frantically. Their fearful cries were unlike anything Chris had heard before. Reluctantly, he and his son ventured into the backyard to investigate, their retriever leading the way. At the edge of their property, near the blueberry hedgerow, they encountered something that defied explanation. Standing about 4 feet tall was a being encased in a translucent, glass-like covering with a faint red glow. It appeared to wear goggles and a dark mask. Chris froze in disbelief, his mind racing. Was it an alien? A government experiment? The being didn't run or fade, it simply vanished before his eyes. His son, trembling, whispered, "That's what I saw at the campsite." Back in the house, Chris double-checked the locks, peering into the dark, feeling watched. Over the following days, paranoia consumed them. His son suffered from nightmares and every noise seemed sinister. Chris began researching UFO sightings and similar experiences, uncovering countless reports of strange lights and beings from all over the world. But instead of answers, he found more questions. Years later, on April 8, 2012, Chris experienced another bizarre event. At 3 a.m. during a foggy, rainy night, he and his wife were startled awake by twirling sparks near a large tree behind their home. Flames erupted inexplicably on the wet tree. Panicked, they rushed outside to extinguish the fire. What caused the fire, and was it connected to their earlier encounters? Chris didn't know, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his family had been marked, their lives forever altered by forces beyond comprehension. After extinguishing the fire near the tree for the 3rd time, Chris and his wife, exhausted and confused, returned to bed. As they lay there discussing the inexplicable flames, they kept glancing out the window, fearing it might reignite. Finally, they began to drift off to sleep. Suddenly, Chris awoke to a deep, commanding voice that simply said, "Arise." He opened his eyes to find several beings standing beside his bed. They were tall, between 6 and 7 feet, with bluish-white, glowing skin. Chris was paralyzed with fear and disbelief. One of the beings reached out and gently took his hand, guiding him outside toward the kennels at the rear of his property. Though the experience felt surreal, Chris was certain he wasn't dreaming. Everything was vivid and tangible. Without speaking, the woman conveyed a telepathic message about future events. She revealed that a significant planetary alignment linked to the pyramids would occur, accompanied by the appearance of a red star. This alignment, she explained, would herald new knowledge for humanity. Chris saw visions of the Sphinx and the constellation Leo as she relayed the message. She implied this event would happen in 2026, but she didn't elaborate on what the new knowledge entailed. After delivering her message, the woman disappeared, leaving Chris stunned. As the sun began to rise, Chris realized he had been outside for hours, though it felt like only minutes. He returned to his house, still clutching the strange object. His wife was asleep, unaware of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. Unable to sleep, Chris sat at the kitchen table, turning the rock-like object over in his hands. He felt deeply changed, as though some profound awakening had occurred. When his wife woke up, he recounted everything, but neither of them could make sense of the experience. The visions of the Sphinx, the constellation Leo, and the cryptic message about 2026 left Chris with more questions than answers. Over time, he began to research and connect the dots, but the full meaning of that night remains elusive. To this day, Chris stands by his account, no matter how surreal it may sound. As 2026 approaches, it leaves many wondering, what could this planetary alignment bring? And why was Chris chosen to receive this mysterious message? In April 2019, after months of relentless snow, a team searching for missing camper Jordan Greider uncovered bones scattered around an abandoned campsite. The campsite, still buried under 2 to 4 feet of snow, revealed chilling details: a shredded jacket, pieces of clothing, and bloodstains inside a hammock. A 9mm Beretta pistol with 2 unused magazines lay untouched inside the hammock. Nearby, searchers found additional bones and scraps of fabric, but a skull was never recovered. Jordan's cell phone was also found, with its last recorded activity being a family group message sent on October 8, 2018, the day before he disappeared. Despite the grim findings, neither foul play nor suicide seemed to explain the scene. Fast forward to August 21, 2020, forensic experts confirmed the bones belonged to Jordan. However, the evidence raised more questions than answers. Jordan's family speculated he was attacked by wolves during his first night in the hammock, a theory supported by the discovery of wolf tracks and scat near the site. But experts like Thomas Gable, a wolf specialist from the University of Minnesota, dismissed this idea. He pointed out that wolves are messy predators, and the lack of carnage at the campsite, bite marks on the bones, or evidence of a struggle made it unlikely. Additionally, Jordan's knives, known to be sharp and always on hand, were found sheathed and clean, further challenging the wolf attack hypothesis. Whatever attacked Jordan must have struck with such speed and force that he had no time to react or defend himself with his weapons. This led to online speculation of a more sinister origin. Some theorized that a Bigfoot or Wendigo could have ambushed Jordan, killed him, and dragged away his remains, leaving wolves to scavenge later. While such theories remain unsubstantiated, they underscore the eerie and unexplained circumstances surrounding his death. To this day, the official cause of Jordan's death is undetermined, and the case, though closed, leaves behind a haunting mystery. The next story takes us to California, where strange and unexplainable events unfolded in the Trinity National Forest. In the summer of 2008, Michael and Cody, 2 experienced surveyors, were conducting water sample tests in the forest. The day was routine. Clear skies, temperatures in the mid-70s, and a light breeze. Perfect conditions for fieldwork. Around 3:30 p.m., they reached a familiar rock formation that required a short climb. Michael, carrying most of the equipment, scrambled to the top first, but as soon as he reached the summit, he froze. Cody, close behind, bumped into him, dropping a collection container that rolled down the rocks. But Cody quickly forgot about the mishap when he saw Michael's face. Normally calm and unshaken even by encounters with bears or mountain lions, Michael now stood pale and wide-eyed, unable to speak. Growing frustrated, Cody pushed past him to see what had caused this reaction. What he saw changed their lives forever. In the creek below stood a large, smoky gray humanoid figure about 7 feet tall, using a sharp stick to spear fish. The creature's arms were extraordinarily long, almost touching the water when it bent down. Its features were disturbingly human yet distorted, and its movements were both deliberate and alien. Before the men could react, the creature noticed them. It froze, staring back with an expression of pure terror. Then, it leaped onto a massive boulder, slapping it with its powerful hands. The sound echoed loudly, and with another slap, it propelled itself onto another rock, all the while keeping its eyes locked on the surveyors. In a series of incredible jumps, the creature vanished into the tree line, leaving Michael and Cody paralyzed with fear and disbelief. Trained to document and analyze their environment, neither man could comprehend what they had just witnessed. The forest was silent again, but their encounter remained vivid in their minds. To this day, they have no explanation for the humanoid figure they saw that afternoon. The 2 surveyors stood frozen for a moment before panic set in. Abandoning all composure, they bolted back through the forest. They didn't even bother retracing their steps along the trail. Instead, they crashed through the underbrush, leaping over fallen trees and taking the most direct route back to their truck. As they ran, strange echoing sounds trailed behind them, growing louder, but neither dared to look back. When they finally reached their truck, they were so shaken that it took several tries just to get the keys into the ignition. Once inside, they sped off without a second glance. When they returned to their office, they avoided mentioning the encounter altogether. They turned in their water samples from earlier that day and quietly went home. The lead surveyor called in sick the next day, and upon his return he submitted a request to transfer to a different district. From that point on, both men refused to set foot in that part of the forest. One of them, to this day, completely avoids discussing the incident. Both men were Native Americans who had grown up in the area, familiar with its wildlife and the traditional stories passed down about mysterious beings in the forest. Yet, despite their knowledge and expertise, they were left deeply unnerved by what they had witnessed. The true identity of the creature remains a mystery, as does the meaning behind its strange and deliberate actions. From the depths of Lake Seneca. For the final tale, we venture beneath the surface of Lake Seneca, a place of folklore and mystery for centuries. On July 14, 1899, Captain Carlton S. Herendine stood at the helm of the paddle steamer, leading an evening cruise across the tranquil waters of Lake Seneca in New York. The lake had long been steeped in Native American legends of a fierce beast dwelling in its depths, stories often dismissed as mere folklore. But on that summer evening, the captain and his crew witnessed something that would turn myth into reality. At around 7 p.m., as the steamer glided across the lake, Captain Herendine and his boatswain, Frederick Rose, noticed a dark object in the water approximately 365 meters ahead. Initially, they thought it was an overturned boat, around 15 feet long, dark in color with a sharp prow and a narrow stern. Assuming an accident, the captain slowed the steamer and prepared to assist any potential survivors. However, as they drew closer, the object began moving purposefully, cutting through the water in a deliberate direction. Confused, Captain Herendine adjusted course to follow it, and what happened next left everyone aboard stunned. The narrow front of what they believed to be a boat suddenly opened, revealing 2 rows of razor-sharp white teeth. As it turned, the crew realized they were looking at a creature far larger than they'd first thought, nearly 25 feet long with a powerful tail that tapered and widened at the end, resembling a whale's. Its head was triangular, about 4 feet in length, with teeth resembling a bizarre cross between a shark's and a sperm whale's. The creature's body appeared armored, like a tortoise shell, with a brownish-green hue. Its underbelly was creamy white, and its large, round, unblinking eyes added to its alien appearance. Captain Herendine estimated the beast weighed around 1,000 pounds. The sheer size and unusual anatomy of the creature were unlike anything he or anyone else aboard had ever encountered. Despite the fear coursing through him, the captain made an extraordinary decision. He turned to follow the beast further. The final encounter at Lake Seneca. Captain Carlton S. Herendine, aboard the paddle steamer, made a decision that would either make him a hero or end in disaster. As the strange, massive creature loomed in the water, he gave the order to accelerate. His plan was simple: ram the beast head-on. The crew, aware of the risks, prepared the life-saving equipment. Passengers braced themselves, unsure if they were about to witness an incredible victory or a tragic accident. The tension was palpable as the gained speed aimed directly at the monster. But the creature wasn't as mindless as they'd hoped. Just as the steamer closed in, it dived beneath the surface with a sudden, deliberate motion. It passed harmlessly over the spot it had occupied seconds earlier. Some passengers swore they could see its shadow moving deep below. Before the crew could regroup, a piercing scream echoed from a woman on deck. She was pointing toward the water. The creature had resurfaced, now about 50 yards away, in nearly the same place it had vanished. This time, Captain Herendine changed tactics. He maneuvered the steamer to strike the creature with the starboard paddle wheel. Picking up speed again, the Otetiani bore down on its target. The beast, perhaps fatigued or unsuspecting, didn't react in time. The collision was catastrophic. A loud, gut-wrenching thud reverberated through the ship. Passengers were thrown off their feet, some slamming into the rails and each other. For a terrifying moment, the Otetiani tilted as if it might capsize, but the crew acted swiftly to stabilize it. Silence fell over the ship. No one dared to speak or move. Then they saw it. The creature floated lifeless beside the ship, a massive gash torn through its side. Its head rose one last time, emitting what witnesses described as a deep, sorrowful sigh before going still. The monster of Lake Seneca was dead. The crew quickly sprang into action, lowering ropes and hooks to secure the carcass. Passengers joined in, determined to retrieve the body as proof of what they had seen. For a brief moment, they succeeded, hoisting most of the massive creature above the water's surface. But disaster struck. One of the ropes securing the tail slipped, causing the heavy tail section to drop back into the water. The sudden shift in weight was too much for the remaining ropes to handle. Despite everyone's efforts, the carcass slid out of their grasp and splashed back into the lake. To their horror, the creature began to sink rapidly. The water in that part of Lake Seneca was over 600 feet deep, and it was well known that anything that sank to those depths was never seen again. They could only watch helplessly as the beast vanished into the dark, cold abyss, taking with it the proof of its existence. Despite the loss of the carcass, many credible witnesses had seen the creature in detail. Among them were Public Works officials Albert L. Fowle and D.W. Halenbeck, Police Commissioner George C. Schell, Geneva Telephone Company manager Fred S. Bronson, Philadelphia businessman Charles Eon, and Professor George R. Elwood, a geologist from Ontario. Their descriptions aligned: a massive armored creature, nearly 25 feet long, with razor-sharp teeth, a triangular head, and a body covered in thick, turtle-like plating. Professor Elwood speculated that it might have been a Clydastes, an extinct marine reptile from the mosasaur family. He theorized that these creatures could have survived in the lake's underwater caves and tunnels. Other theories ranged from a rogue whale to a giant fish or even an unknown species entirely. Some believed it was the last of its kind, a relic of prehistoric times, while others feared there could be more lurking in the lake's mysterious depths. The Native American legends of a fierce beast in Lake Seneca suddenly seemed less like folklore and more like a chilling reality. Whatever it was, the monster of Lake Seneca has never been seen again, leaving its story shrouded in mystery. Lake Seneca, with its vast, uncharted depths, remains a place of intrigue and speculation. This tale from 1899 reminds us that some mysteries, like the lake itself, may never be fully understood. And so, the legend of the Lake Seneca monster lives on, buried somewhere in the dark depths of the lake. Was it a prehistoric survivor, an undiscovered species, or something else entirely? We may never know. Stories like these remind us of the mysteries our world still holds, hidden in dense forests beneath vast waters, or right beneath our feet. Sometimes legends aren't just stories, they're glimpses into the unknown. If you enjoyed this dive into the strange and unexplained, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content that takes you beyond the ordinary. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think this creature was? As always, keep an open mind, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next episode. Stay safe, everyone.